You described growing up in the American Southwest and how much that affected you in such a beautiful description of the desert, such an underappreciated place sometimes, and a really impactful event that sometimes people forget, that even though it's only one generation removed, is the fallout from nuclear testing in the desert. And I know that this has affected family members of yours. Personally, I know other people whose family members have been affected by this and suffered from different conditions such as cancer and other frailties that are caused by fallout from being a downwinder. And if you are comfortable with it, I'd love to have you share more about that and how this issue has come to top of mind for you and what its relationship is to the environment.
Well, the testing area, Mercury, they called it, is not much more than 100 miles from downtown St. George to the west in Nevada. It's very remote, obviously. But we were a very small town back in the 50s and 60s when they were doing the testing. We were 4,000 to 5,000 people. And so they would wait until the winds were correct. They didn't want the wind going south to Las Vegas or, heaven forbid, Los Angeles. They wanted it to go east so it would affect fewer people. So basically, they timed the explosions so that the tests so that the radiation would come right over us. I remember seeing it as a boy, the clouds that came over, and sometimes we get up early to watch the light in the west as one was ignited. Some days you couldn't play outside; you had to stay inside. But we paid a price. My grandmother on my mother's side died of cancer in the 50s. My mother died of cancer in the 80s. My wife had breast cancer and kidney cancer. So it's hard for me to think that it was just, it didn't have an impact on people, because all I have to do is go around the block here in town and I see families that were affected by the fallout. They did provide compensation, some compensation, financial compensation. You had to have a certain type of cancer to qualify. But in all the cases I mentioned with my family, they all qualified for compensation. But what would have been nicer, in my opinion, than the money that was given was for the government to say, we're sorry. They've never, ever acknowledged or accepted blame. And I understand national interests and all of that business, but it would have been nice to have somebody say they're sorry, especially after watching your loved ones go through cancer.
So sorry that we went through that.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's just another incident, though, of not giving enough consideration to the consequences of actions that affect people and the environment. I mean, there were thousands of cattle and sheep killed as a result of that testing. Farm ranchers were wiped out. They lost their herds and their flocks, and
Not to mention landscapes disturbed for the mining of the materials that are needed for
right, the
processing and
uranium
testing.
mines in the southeast of Utah. We had some military people while I was in high school stationed here in St. George for a radar bombing site that they ran, and they were instructed to buy their milk at Nellis Air Force Base and not buy local milk because of the radiation contaminations from the tests. The government knew something was not right, but they were pretty careless.
Given that experience for you, do you? I imagine that it's shaped your worldview a lot on nuclear development, and it's a hot issue all of a sudden again, and both here in Utah and worldwide, honestly, the talk of not just nuclear war and nuclear weapons, but a new reignited energy around nuclear energy and the development of nuclear energy and things. And wonder what your thoughts are about that, because there's this sort of gray area where that we talk about it as being a clean or a low carbon energy, but then there's also all of the downsides and the factors that we need to consider about not just energy, but also development of weapons and those things.
On the energy side, Phil, I've thought a lot about it. I've thought a lot about it. I don't have an answer. I can see, if done correctly, we obviously reduce our carbon footprint a great deal if nuclear energy could be done correctly. I guess the bottom line is I don't have faith that it can be done correctly.
Mm.
I'm very leery of nuclear energy, and I'd rather go with, I'd rather see us in the U.S. do more what Europe is doing with clean energy, wind and solar. And I've seen great gains in the last couple of decades. You just drive from here to Las Vegas or California to see the acres and acres and acres of solar panels that are in the desert now. I'd much rather see us go that direction than to build nuclear plants.
I feel like we've kind of ended on a heavy note, and so I was actually gonna ask, what's something that's giving you hope right now? I mean, besides seeing all of the solar panels.
I think there's a greater awareness now of environmental issues. I have great hope. I see it in probably more liberal states, but Utah probably we lag a little behind. We're a little more conservative here, of course. But I think we're talking about things now and doing things that 20, 30 years ago would have been unthinkable, just would have been totally, crazy. Nobody would have thought you could make a difference with solar energy. So, I'm hopeful.